So, with this segment, we are diving kind of into the world of soccer, which we never do. Um, but it's really just a broad topic in the world of sports in general, and that is replay reviews. Um, this whole segment is based kind of around the ideas brought up in this article on the score by Scott Stinson, titled "We've Gone Too Far with VAR and All Replay Reviews." And so, to kind of give some backstory to this, people in watching the Euros in soccer um, will have seen um, some of the new technology they've had in terms of video replays, in terms of officiating after the fact, whatever you want to call it. Basically, there's a sensor in the ball that detects when it's been struck, which will help with detecting handballs. Let's say you can't tell in the clip whether the ball hit somebody's hand. You can go to the sensor and see, oh, yeah, it kind of spiked up, so it definitely touched his hand, or, oh, no, we didn't see anything. So the goal can stand. Whatever, you can kind of go and imagine all of these different ways in which it could be used. And so this article by Scott Stinson was basically just arguing that this is too far. Well, it's kind of cool on initial viewing. It's not necessarily what you want to happen in sports because it's kind of the taking the spirit out of it in a way, because it's almost fine-tuning officiating too much. Should a game really be decided because somebody's fingertip brushed up against a ball in soccer? Like these fine minute details. It's like in hockey. Should a game be decided by somebody's skate who was this far offside, right? Does that kind of take the spirit out of it? Then you also have the argument about video replays taking too long, slowing the game down. There's all of these arguments that can be made potentially against video replay. I'm not necessarily advocating for this, and I'll get to my position later, but I'll just kind of throw it over to you first, Simon, in terms of what you think of video review in general. Do you think we overutilize it now? And what kind of changes would you like to see, if any?
Um, I think that, and I have a mixed opinion on this, honestly. I think I'm still sort of making my opinion. Mainly because as somebody, like most people, have played sports for most of my life. And especially in hockey, what was a bit of a goon. And you sort of learn how to bend the rules, right? I think that's safe to say about a lot of sports. You learn how to get away with things that might be technically illegal, but hey, the ref's not looking right now, right? And I think this kind of takes away that part of the game, which isn't as interesting. Like I think of a story that I remember hearing about Kobe Bryant. What he used to do before every season, whenever they'd update the referee rule book, he'd go in and read it so he knew where referees would be standing on every play, so he knew whether or not they'd be looking at him, so that he could get away with certain things, right? And I'm sure that's a thing in all sports to a certain degree, right? Especially in hockey. Like, sure, nobody likes it when a player on your own team gets tripped and everybody throws their hand in the air and going like, how the hell didn't the referee catch that? But imagine if, like, all of a sudden just like a whistle goes off and the TV and the big like jumbotron goes like, I saw that. Like, it's just like it's not as fun, right? I think at least to me, I like it for goals. I was gonna say, I think, as somebody who is a fan of a team that has been rather fucked by not having instant replay for certain goals that we won't talk about, but I think that for goals it makes sense. For big moments like that, it makes sense. But for stuff like penalties or offsides, or I guess actually maybe offside sort of shit. Shit. Maybe offside sort of does fall on goals, right? Like, it's so weird. It's such a hard conversation to have because you don't want situations like '04 to happen again with the Flames, where like was it in, was it not in? Like, you don't want that situation again. If you want to go even further back with Dallas and Buffalo, I believe back in
Yeah.
1999, like that situation as well. Like that, you don't want that stuff ruining the biggest games like in your respective sports, right? Because then you're starting to talk about how then it ruins the spirit of it a little bit. Like, it's something that's needed, but it's not something that should be abused. I guess is my opinion on it. Mainly because as somebody, like I said, I am a goon through and through. I enjoy walking the line a little bit. So I think if if you just made it so players can't get rid of anything, it would take away the physicality a little bit. It would take away the fun of it, I think, to a certain degree. But at the same time, it's so weird. There's no perfect way to do it, I guess would be my opinion. I've danced around it though. I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good way to put it, honestly. I think it is a lot of gray area. Like, I don't think you can really, like, I'm kind of glad you had that moment where you're like, well, offsides are kind of like a goal, you know, because
Yeah,
it kind of
exactly.
demonstrates how, like, I think hard it is to have a firm opinion on it. I think this article by Scott Stinson, I think, is very well written, and I think makes a lot of good points, but I think it does kind of miss the other side of it in terms of what you talked about, situations like '04, like whatever it was, 1996, like I think of an example from another sport. I think it was I don't know,
I think
1999.
it was 99. Yeah,
Buffalo,
I
Buffalo,
think.
Buffalo.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
96 was something else. I think it was 1999. Buffalo, Dallas, anyways. People know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But the other example that I think of in terms of high profile stuff where replay would have caught it, think about the NFC Championship between the Saints and the Rams, where it was the clearest pass interference of all time. I believe it was Tommy Lee Jones who was committed the penalty for the Rams, or was he the receiver on the Saints? I don't remember. Anyways, we all have the picture in the head, in our heads of the Saints receiver just getting absolutely creamed by the Rams corner, which would have given the Saints a first down, likely would have scored a touchdown, or been able to just wind the time off the clock, and game wouldn't have gone to overtime. Saints would be going to the Super Bowl, right? Like, it's that huge call where if you had been able to review pass interference, then you would have immediately changed the call, right? Like, it's the kind of thing where not being able to review something has led to one of the most egregious changes in game outcome of all time in any sport, right? I think that's why I kind of lean towards going against Scott Stinson's argument, because he there's a lot of good points to say that replay has gone too far. In what he said, I think microanalyzing the game does kind of take the spirit out of it a little bit. Determining whether somebody's toe was offside kind of takes the spirit out of it to an extent.
It also
the
arguably doesn't matter.
Yeah, like, exactly. The rule was not designed with that intent, right? You weren't, when people were creating the rule of offsides, it was created so that someone wouldn't be egregiously cherry picking or egregiously already in the offensive zone. It wasn't created so that if somebody wasn't dragging their back foot enough, that it wouldn't be called, right?
Yep.
I think that's a big thing here.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I definitely see where you're coming from. But even just like, I think in soccer, it's kind of a weird... Soccer's really weird to me about it because of the fact that, especially with the handball example, like, that's such a weird, tiny little thing, right? Like, at least to me, like, that's such a tiny thing to put that much emphasis on it, because that's not something that... I mean, I'm sure it has. I'm not a soccer fan necessarily, so I haven't necessarily... I can't pull an example, but, like, I'm sure it has affected the game before, like a handball, where a place where a handball should have been called, and leading to a goal, or maybe leading to
famous examples.
Yeah, I'm sure there has been, but I also think that not every single time a defender touches the ball with his hand should it be a complete, like, handing it right over, just because it could happen at any point. It could happen at midfield, where, like, you could accidentally try and kick it to a teammate and a pinky touches the ball, and all of a sudden sensor goes off, got to give it to the other team. It's just like, who cares? Like, it's not an active attempt to, like, actually change anything. You're accidentally, like, this isn't going to catch a player basically punching a ball to his teammate. You'll see that like, in broad daylight. This is trying to catch people who literally it's gracing the hand of. Like, that's what this rule is going to do. Because honestly, without technology like this, you would probably see it anyway. If you had regular video replay where they show like the goal and they show like it bounces and like changes direction off a defender's hand. There you go. Right there, you got your rule right there. But like literally, if it doesn't change direction and it graces his fingernail, it's like, who cares? Like, why does it matter? Like, so at least in that rule, I don't get offsides. Makes sense. I will say offsides in soccer is a huge deal. I do understand that. Nobody knows how soccer offsides work, and I know that's like the whole joke. That's the whole joke they had in Ted Lasso as well with that entire thing, was that it took him 3 years to figure out how offsides work in soccer. But I think that's a bit bigger of a deal, with especially with how precise it kind of is. Like how precise of a science offsides are in soccer. It's not the same in hockey though. It's literally a fucking blue line. Like it's not a precise science. I don't think we need that exact same thing for hockey. But although then again, there's been controversies in hockey, so it's I don't know. There's no good way to do it.
And I mean, I think I kind of cut off in the point I was making, because in terms of the offside stuff, I completely agree with you. All of that, like soccer, handballs, the little things where you're just kind of nitpicking it, completely am on board with saying that's going too far. But I think the argument that I'm gonna make as a whole is to say, which world would you rather live in? Would you rather live in a world where stuff is micromanaged, maybe there's a couple calls that frustrate you, but ultimately you get it right? Right? Like, even though it's going to be like, oh, that's stupid, like somebody's hand nicked it. Somebody's hand did nick it, I guess. Like, it is still the correct call. Like, that is a frustrating situation, no doubt, but it is still correct. In the other world, though, the world that I think we currently live in a lot of other sports, you see lots of these bigger calls, lots of these more egregious calls get missed because of the lack of video replay, right? I think I would much rather have a system that's a little bit too micromanagerial rather than a system that is a little bit too hands-off and is saying, hey, we're just going to let it play, or we're just going to trust our eyesight, because I think you do miss a lot of stuff. I'd rather have the replay oversight to catch the larger, more egregious, more game-changing calls than to be mad about a system where things just kind of feel stupid and bullshit sometimes because of how precise it is. I think that's where it comes in to say, I would rather just get it right. I'm not saying that there's not flaws in it. I'm not saying it's not frustrating. If it comes down to an inch, if it slows the game down, obviously that's frustrating. But I think I'd much rather live in a world where stuff like that NFC Championship pass interference gets called, where stuff like the 0-4 goal is in, stuff like Brett Hull's foot getting called in the crease. There's something to be said about consistency, and there's something to be said about getting it right.
I think that's a terrific question to ask, actually, because I think it really does, like, it brings up a lot of points that I think you kind of swayed me a little bit, because I do agree with a lot of what you just said there, with, like, consistency obviously is a huge thing. My hockey traditionalist mind is so, like, it's so tough for me. Hockey, again, I'm going back to hockey because it's, like, it's the one that's, like, right at home for me, right, where it's, like, every penalty should not be called in hockey. That is my opinion. I think that the idea that you can't get away with anything ruins the physicality of hockey a little bit, and it ruins a lot of things about hockey as a whole. But I also think that the 0-4 goal should have counted. So it's tough. It's so hard, right? Like it's so it really does bring up like all of the shitty things that like there's no good way to do it. I think as much as I want to play devil's advocate for it, I don't think my traditionalist like hockey mind in that sense could necessarily argue the other side, because I think 90% of the time you probably should rely on consistency over the tradition of letting some shit go, right? Because you also got to realize in playoffs, you really think they're going to turn that shit off in the playoffs? All of a sudden those big hits that they're like, let them play, that's not going to be a thing anymore. There's no let them play hockey. That goes away with this assumption, right? And I think that's also a conversation. Like, are we okay with that type of play? I wasn't even thinking about that part before, but like, are we okay with the advancement of AI taking over for referees? It's just like, I don't know, man. It's an interesting thing. There's some spots where it makes a lot of sense. And there's some spots where I think they should just kind of let her be. For example, baseball and hockey are two very different positions. We haven't even talked about baseball yet for this, and the potential of robotic umpires, which feels like at this point feels like they're living in the past, not having them, right? Like that's how it's felt for the last little bit.
I think that was in our long lost trick play episode, the lost trick play files, where
you might be right.
Where we had a full segment on robot umps that will never see the light of day.
Yeah, you might be right. You know what's the funny thing? I don't remember a single thing we talked about on that episode. And it's the funny thing. It's really funny because I think it's impressive you're actually able to remember this. The only reason I remember what we talked about at all is because I have to edit it. So I end up having to rewatch basically all the stuff that we end up doing. So it like comes back around. I have to listen to everything twice. But like otherwise, we'd be coming back in and I'm like, I don't fucking know what we talked about last week. So it is the convenient thing. I have that, but
mine like a steel trap.
Oh yeah, having to not have to edit that episode basically means completely gone out of my mind. I couldn't tell you.
I think I can probably hit that one beat for beat. Robot umps.
Was that the
Anthony
main thing
Richardson
we talked
injury? No, Anthony Richardson injury was one that we opened with. Whether he'd get back to form, and there was another.
Yeah.
It might have been a Texans. It might have been a Texans or another young quarterback segment.
Yeah, I remember the. You know what's funny? I don't remember the robot umps. I remember the Anthony Richardson one because I remember what my opinion on that was. I do remember that, but it's the funny thing. It's the funny thing for sure. We've kind of drifted away from the topic, but I think we were wrapping up anyway.
Yes.
But I think the end thing that we can both agree on for sure is there's no good way to do it. Absolutely none.
Yeah.
Like there is no perfect solution.
My end thing is honestly to just say like. I think when you dive into it, as much as the refs screw up in a lot of these situations, I think you have to give them props, right?
Yes,
because
I refereeing think is incredibly hard.
Playing this, like playing this out, it's really hard to see because I think, at least in my opinion, it feels like my initial response is always going to be like, call it correctly, call it by the book. But there's a lot more nuance in that, right? Like you brought it up in terms of like physicality in hockey, or even physicality in football too. Like you can bring it up, like all these different things. Where if you're calling everything by the book, then you don't necessarily have the same game, and that's the argument that's made in this article.
To make another point, if you're calling everything by the book, every single person in like a hockey scrum behind the net, like that happens very often, would be going to the box for roughing. That's just how it works. Usually the refs let it go unless something egregious happens because that's the game, right? But by the rule book, at least to my knowledge of it, in that situation where you have all 5 guys on the ice all pushing and shoving and like knocking each other over, maybe gloves weren't dropped, everybody's going to the box. And nobody wants that. That's lame. Like the scrums that's the fun of hockey, right? Like a lot of physicality. I think hockey is the one sport where like I would prefer it stay limited for the most part in situations that aren't goals. Penalties, I think, should remain. I think that video review should stay in places where it will impact the score in hockey. That would be my opinion. I think any other spot video review should stay out because I just think there's so much else that is always going on the ice. I think it's very different though for every sport because I think baseball is. I have the complete opposite opinion of like baseball should be almost completely automated at this point. There's so little in baseball that, like the only and we talked about this in the robot ump segment with like the whole framing by catchers thing. Like that's a whole skill by catchers. You're basically trying to fool the ump, right? Where you're trying to like move your hand so it looks like you caught it in the strike zone, but. And obviously you're taking away that with the robot umps, but that's like compared to like the scrums in hockey and playoff hockey culture.
Yeah.
That's such a small thing. That's such a tiny thing.
To that point, particularly about the robot umps, I think I was formulating. I was like, "Ooh, can I have a good mic drop moment to end my kind of rambling opinions that I've had throughout this segment?"
Okay.
And I think I do. I think my final opinion on this will be, I think you should be able to review everything, but you shouldn't review everything. Now let me break that down, because I don't know if that makes sense.
I'm gonna put that
You
on a
should
card.
be able
I'm gonna put that on a card with like Play-Dohs, just like Play-Dohs on it, just like because I'm just thinking of like, that was like, not to stop you in your tracks, but like, just to make like a little bit of like thing. That's some like Greek philosopher bullshit. Like, to be or not to
exactly.
be. Like,
That's what I'm going for. That's what
terrific.
I'm going for. Hear me out. Hear me out. You should be able to review everything. I think in every scenario you have the video feed. If there is a call that seems close, if there is something that with your eye you're catching and you're saying, I don't know if that's right, you should always be able to challenge it. I don't think any challenges should be off limits. That is what I'd say when I say you should be able to challenge everything. Think about robot umps. If you don't want to if you want to keep framing the pitch in the game, if you want to keep the human element in the game there, you move to, what are they doing in a lot of the minor leagues? The challenge system, where the pitcher just goes, hey, check that. And then you can go and challenge a pitch with a robot ump. So you can review everything. But you shouldn't be reviewing everything constantly. And I think that's where some of this stuff comes in terms of handballs, in terms of like all of these specific technologies that are like fine-tuning every aspect of the game. I think that's where the line is. I think you should always have something to be able to go to if the call is too close for the human eye to say, let's look at this again. We think that this is something that needs a closer inspection, but you don't need to inspect everything. And I think that's where the line is for me.
Yeah,
that's my explanation of my weird Greek philosopher quote.
Because and you've brought this up multiple times with the whole thing of like, you would rather live in a world where almost everything's getting reviewed than a world where there isn't anything being reviewed. To bring back up the playoff hockey scenario, right? Like, in a world where everything is being reviewed, do you actually want that? Like, especially in the playoffs, like with, I don't know how to explain this. Like the physicality side, I keep bringing it up, but it's the thing that like makes the most sense in my own head. Like, would you actually want that in playoff hockey? Because I think there's so many negatives.
I would to the extent that it's not like every hit is getting micromanaged, right?
But that's the thing.
I think
like,
it's okay.
I think that
I think it's no. I think it's okay to be like, hey, let's challenge this play. Hey, we aren't sure, so we need to review for a 5-minute major. That kind of thing. I'm okay with that. Because I think the argument that you're kind of lining out here is, what do you take? Do you take the world where, who was it? Fogel in the Cup Finals, where there was a very iffy kind of slew foot, whatever it was called, 5-minute major, out of the game, ejected, right? A big momentum swing, where a lot of people were frustrated with that call because it seemed very iffy, and it was one of those things where it feels like they're being a little bit too precise. Would you rather have a world that has that, but also gets the 0-4 goal call right? Or a world that misses the Fogel call and misses the Fogel goal, and misses the 0-4 goal. Sorry. I would rather live in a world where they just get the goal right? They still took the time to make sure it was correct. And while I understand the frustration with being too specific in that scenario, I think being able to go back to a video review booth for both instances is ultimately better for the game, even if it does take away something. I think you are gaining more than you're taking.
I think a big part of it, to add something at the end, like right at the end, I think they need to speed up reviews if we're going to be talking about that. And I think it's
Yeah.
easiest to do that in baseball because of how quickly we see it on the TV screen, for example. And I think we brought this up in the auto ump thing. I think I said the exact same thing. Like,
Yeah.
if the pitcher wants to challenge it, or if the batter wants to challenge it, just have them point to a dude watching the game on an iPad 10 feet away. Just like go like, and he'll either give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And that's it. You don't talk about it anymore. It's not like in the NHL where everybody ends up standing around for 10 minutes with their hands up their ass. Like, it's not like it's not like it doesn't need to be a whole thing, right? Like, it doesn't need to be this whole thing where Sportsnet puts up the two images, like, or the two video feeds back, like, next to each other of both coaches, or like the coach and like the person who scored the goal that they're reviewing. Like, you don't need all that shit. Just have like a point to a dude, the dude gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down, go on with our lives, right? Like, it should be as much as that. Like, I don't think you need to, because if you're going to up the amount of reviews, it's the same thing with soccer. Do you really want to be restarting play every 10 seconds? Like, oh, guys, it's the 54th minute of the game. It's 0-0 and a half. I think that guy touched the ball with his pinky. And then you have to sit there for 10 minutes trying to figure out if he did it or not. Like, it's just like, who cares? Like, it's just to have a dude. I think a lot of these issues could be solved by a dude giving thumbs up or thumbs down after looking at whatever AI thing, like, shows whether it happened or not, right? So I think,
Well, I mean, they basically have that in tennis, right?
sure,
Where you
yeah,
just like they'll go up to the people and then it'll be like, okay, let's watch the quick video of did the ball hit in or out, and it'll just give you an answer. So I do agree with you there. I
tennis
think
might be a bit more of a precise science than hockey, for example, though, with stuff like that.
Yeah, but then I do think then we are kind of circling back around to you're basically getting what you're asking for with the technology that started this whole conversation with the handball thing, right?
Yep.
Where
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
a very clear sensor that gives you a very clear yes or no answer, where you can look at the sensor and say, did he touch it or did he not? So,
Yep.
I mean, then you're just kind of going back around to the other side of the argument.
I guess.
Which I think kind of perfectly encapsulates this whole thing, right?
It's all
It's a
bullshit.
very hard thing to take a side on. Yeah, it is all bullshit. Um, yeah, that's a great way to end it on. It's all bullshit.
It's all bullshit. Who cares? Just don't take away my
There's no
physical playoff hockey, and I won't cry.
yeah.
That's
No,
my one.
There's no right answer.
Yep, exactly.
There's no right answer.
God, and at the end of the day, it's just like, that's the only reason it's tough for me, is the fact that, God, I don't want to live in a world where we don't have that playoff culture, because it's like, it's so fun. It's so fun, right? Like, and you can feel it. You can feel it in like all sports that are like that. Like, just the fact that it's different. And I know, like, next week I've got some lacrosse games that I'm gonna, like, playoff lacrosse games that I'm gonna call, and I'm so fucking hyped for it, like, compared to regular season games, because you just know it's gonna be different, right? You know it's gonna have that
Yeah.
different atmosphere. It's gonna be that physical atmosphere, and it's just so much more fun. Like, it's just a different thing, and a big part of that is the physicality. It's the same thing in lacrosse as it is hockey. Like, it's so, at least to me, that's my only reason that I'm hesitant. And I think I've said that multiple times at this point. But it's the only reason that I have any sort of like backlash to the idea of automating the entire thing. It's just, don't take away all my fighting. Don't take away all my dumb fighting.